Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 7th, 2021. Want to know who's going to pay for President Biden's spending proposals? Pass the FAIRtax. While many in the media were praising President Biden's speech to Congress about his plans to spend as much as $6 trillion over the next few years, Dr. Douglas Holtz-Eaton, the director of the Congressional Budget Office from 2003 to 2005, wrote an article entitled "The Fine Art of Making Things Add Up." In that article, he made these points. Mr. Biden said, "So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficit." Dr. Holtz-Eaton says that doesn't add up. The president also said, "I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. Dr. Holtz-Eaton says that doesn't add up either. And lurking in the background are our old friends Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, none of which currently add up budgetarily, and the president is proposing to expand Medicaid and the ACA. So what happens in the next 4 years when the Medicare Trust Fund goes belly up, or in 10 years when the Social Security Trust Fund follows suit? Dr. Holtz-Eaton says none of that adds up." Ronald Reagan once said that if the game of Trivial Pursuit were designed by economists, it would have 100 questions and 3,000 answers. While Dr. Holtz-Eaton's opinion is based on his experience and training, the economists who are advising President Biden are also giving an opinion based on their experience and training. However, there are many variables involved in economic forecasting, and different economists can reach widely differing conclusions based on how much importance each economist assigns to each variable. Now, of course, there's a history in D.C. of the ruling class and their minions in Congress deliberately misleading or even lying to the American people. And, of course, when that happens, they always say it's for the people's own good. The late Charles Krauthammer discussed the lies told by advocates of Obamacare. An October 2013 video shows MIT professor Jonathan Gruber, a principal architect of Obamacare, admitting that in order to get it passed, the law was made deliberately obscure and deceptive. "Lack of transparency is a huge political advantage," says Gruber. "Basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever, but basically that was really critical to getting the thing to pass. Worst was the pretense that Obamacare wouldn't cost anyone anything. On the contrary, it's a win-win," insisted President Obama, promising that the typical family would save $2,500 on premiums every year. Now, skeptics like me pointed out the obvious. You can't subsidize 30 million uninsured without somebody paying something. Now, Gruber admits that Obamacare was a huge transfer of wealth, which had to be hidden from the American people because if you had a law which made it explicit that healthy people pay into the system and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Now, it's not unconstitutional to lie, but it is helpful for citizens to know the cynicism with which the massive federalization of their health care was crafted. The FAIRtax is the only way to know what government programs really cost. Now, President Biden was very involved with the various activities of the Obama administration in misleading, or some would say even lying, to the American people about Obamacare. President Biden was elected to the Senate in 1972 at the age of 29 and left the Senate 36 years later to become vice president in 2008. Now, he firmly believes in the government's ability to produce results. Therefore, it's not difficult to assume that the economists advising him will want to provide answers that fit the narrative that he's promoting. In President Biden's view, all of his proposed spending will be paid for by couples making over $400,000 a year, and those making over $1 million a year will see their capital gains rate more than double from the current 20% to over 43%. An article published by PJ Media discussed a study by the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton Business School about the effects of raising the capital gains tax from 20% to 39.6%. They were particularly interested in whether or not such an increase would raise the promised $1.7 trillion from the rich who have not been paying their fair share. Some key points from that study. We don't think that proposal has a lot of teeth, said John Rickoat, Director of Policy Analysis at the Penn Horton Budget Model, a nonpartisan fiscal policy research group at the business school. There are a lot of games you can play to avoid paying this tax. Horton's researchers, however, believe that once an increase in the capital gains rate is passed, wealthy Americans would simply avoid selling stocks and other investments. The wealthy could also minimize their taxes by paring gains in years when they have losses elsewhere in their portfolio, effectively lowering their taxable net gains for the year. Another strategy could be to sell off investments slowly over time to minimize the amount of tax owed in any one year. Capital gains is a discretionary tax, Ricko said. It's not like the taxes you pay on income. You get to decide when you sell your investments, and therefore you get to decide when you pay the tax. Of course, missing from this debate, and carefully ignored by administration officials, is the impact that these new taxes will have on the rest of us. So how much of these new taxes will be passed on to consumers in the prices of goods and services? How many will be paid by workers who will not see wage increases? Will be paid by workers who get laid off? And how much will be paid by job seekers who can't find a job because the capital needed for expansion is just not available? Now, the fair tax merely replaces the current funding mechanism for the federal government. It doesn't favor either side's spending priorities. When the fair tax is enacted, Congress and the President will still have to decide how to spend the money. However, with the fair tax, people will clearly see how much the government is costing them. It will be printed on every receipt for new goods and services they purchase. Now, John F. Kennedy had some advice that's as relevant today as it was 60 years ago. He said, quote, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of all," end of quote. Now, the easiest way for all of us to be less ignorant is to understand how much things cost, and the fair tax helps us do that. If Congress and the President want to tell us that their spending programs are being paid for from taxes collected, then they need to show us that the fair tax rate will actually cover the costs. It's simple math that any of us can do with a basic calculator. If tax revenues aren't enough to finance their spending programs, Congress and the President need to let taxpayers know that their spending is being financed with borrowed money. In other words, they're shifting the burden of paying for today's spending onto our children and grandchildren. It's that simple, and that's why the ruling class and their minions in Congress don't like the fair tax. They want us to be ignorant. It's time for Americans to take control of our country by eliminating the income payroll tax system. No more games that profit only the ruling class and their minions, the politicians. Enact the fair tax now. If you have friends who don't know about the fair tax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your member of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.